Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9, amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org.
This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by our friends at Green Bike, Salt Lake Barber Company, and HostGator. We're going to be telling you more about them throughout this episode.
And I want to personally welcome you out today, give you a big hug. Welcome to episode 406 of I Am Salt Lake podcast. My name's Chris Hollifield.
And my name's Chrissy Hollifield.
Was Halloween not the best this year, Chrissy?
It was so awesome.
You know, I thought trick-or-treating was dead. I lived downtown, I lived in the apartments, never got any trick-or-treaters. You made me move out here to the suburbs, out here to family life. I'm kidding, you didn't make me move out here, but out here in the suburbs where all the families are, oh my gosh, trick-or-treating is alive and well.
It's so much fun. It's so cool. It's a great way to meet your neighbors.
And it was Lucy's first Halloween.
And she loved it.
Oh my gosh. Hey, if this is your first time listening to this podcast, if this is your first time joining us, first of all, I want to tell you welcome. If you're asking yourself, though, what am I about to listen to? What is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast is all about showcasing awesome people right here in Salt Lake City. We're talking to musicians, authors, business owners, restaurant owners, distilleries, breweries. I think you guys get the idea. We're talking to anyone that might have a cool story to share. We're talking to them right here on this podcast. Hey, who's joining us today on the podcast? Who's joining us on this episode, Chrissy?
Today on the podcast, we sit down and talk with local cannabis and hemp lawyer J.D. Lauritzen. We talk about what got him interested in working in the cannabis industry, what kinds of clients he's helped, his thoughts on legalization, and more. It's a fascinating conversation that we're going to get to in just a minute.
Hey, before we get into that conversation, I want to tell you about one of our sponsors. They're actually new here to the podcast in the sponsor world, so make sure to go out and give them some love and support these guys. Support for I Am Salt Lake podcast is provided by Green Bike, Salt Lake City's nonprofit bike share, connecting employment and residential centers to transit stops and popular entertainment destinations. Green Bike seeks to improve community health, air quality, and increase the use of existing transit infrastructure. Green Bike is a local nonprofit in public-private partnership between Salt Lake City, the Utah Transit Authority, Select Health, and other private sponsors.
To date, Green Bikers have removed 5.5 million vehicle miles from local roads, prevented nearly 5 million pounds of CO2 from entering our air, all while burning 70 million calories in the process. That's 246,000 slices of pizza.
That's a lot of pizza.
That is a lot of pizza.
Hey, to learn more about Green Bike and find out how you can take as many rides as you want for a year for less than 20 cents a day, follow Green Bike on social media at SLC Bike Share or visit them at greenbikeslc.org. Chrissy, Green Bike, I love these guys.
I do too. I love what they're doing for the air in Utah.
What a great way to get around Salt Lake City. Hey, support these guys. And many thanks to Green Bike for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Let's jump into this conversation that we had with J.D. Lauritzen when he came over to our podcast studio, and we got to talk about being a cannabis and hemp lawyer right here in Utah. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy. Where's home for you, man? Like, did you grow up here in Utah?
So I grew up in Sandy. Okay. Went to Skyline High School, and then went to Mesa State College in Grand Junction, Colorado for college. Played a little college football there. It's now known as Colorado Mesa University. I worked my way back here. Worked with my father's home building company for a little while. And around the time the bubble burst the first time around, I made the transition back to school. And before I got into law school, I worked at a law firm downtown in their practice support division, and then went to law school at the University of Nebraska. And after graduating, came back here, worked for a small law firm. At that time was known as Robert B. Sykes and Associates, and then was out on my own for a short period of time before I joined Christensen and Jensen in 2016, in February of 2016.
So you've been there for a minute.
Yeah, I've been there for a few years now, for sure.
So growing up, I mean, did you always want to be a lawyer, like as a kid, right? Like, you know, as a kid, we have these
you have like a dream,
job.
Right? Yeah.
And it's funny, when I was coming out here, I was actually thinking about that. I was like, they'll ask me about, what made me want to be a lawyer. And so when I was a kid, the first job I wanted to be the guy on the back of the trash truck that picks up the cans, the can man.
Dude, that
was the first job I wanted. And then after that, professional football player. But once I realized that wasn't going to be in the cards, lawyer has been the main profession that I wanted to get into. My uncle is a lawyer up in Cache Valley, now retired. And there's a couple of other lawyers in the family, and it's just always something that interested me.
So where did you go to law school then?
The University of Nebraska. I'm a Cornhusker.
You might have said that. I'm sorry.
No problem.
So how long is law school? That's more than 4 years, right?
3 years.
3 years. So it's less.
Yeah. But you have to go through 4 years of school to get into law school, right?
Yeah.
So it's an additional 3 years.
Yeah. So you do your undergrad and then you take the LSAT exam, which I was happy when that was over. I took it twice. My scores were about the same, and then got into the University of Nebraska and didn't really know what to expect going out to Lincoln, but it was an incredible experience. Met some really amazing people. People in the Midwest are just good people.
Lincoln, I got a lot of relatives from that area. And
really?
Isn't there Adams, Nebraska? Do you know, is that near Lincoln?
I'm not sure how close that is. The only other than driving through Nebraska to and from law school, the only other town I spent much time in was in Omaha.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Omaha,
Lincoln and Omaha.
Great music out of there too.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all the boring stuff.
That's the most positive stuff I've ever heard about Nebraska in my whole life. Just so you guys know.
Driving through it, right? Like
it's never ending Nebraska. Driving through it's the worst.
Dude, I want to get right into the good stuff. And I'm sure people are like, oh my gosh, this guy's a cannabis lawyer, right? Like people, I threw it out there on Facebook and stuff too. We're going to get into some questions here from a couple listeners. And like when I found you on Twitter and I was like, this guy's a cannabis and hemp lawyer here in Utah. What?
Is there enough stuff happening in Utah? I'm sure there is, right?
There definitely is. And more is happening, all the time. And so I have followed cannabis legalization since my time in college. Actually, the first paper I wrote in college for my English class, my freshman English class, was about legalizing cannabis and using tax proceeds from it to help, pay down the national debt.
Isn't everybody in college into that though, right? Isn't that
kind of works exactly right? Exactly. And in Colorado, of course, and so I've followed it since then. I followed legalization in Colorado and across the country. And when I knew that Prop 2 was actually going to get on the ballot here and it was really picking up momentum, that's when I really said, you know what? If this passes, I think this is something I can make part of my law practice. Because a lot of my law practice involves compliance, business regulations and things like that. And I said, that will be something that's important, but more importantly is, the patients and the rights of folks. And so civil rights is also a part of my practice. So I'm interested in that. For the most part, I send those folks to the patient advocacy groups. But I really like getting to hear those stories and knowing that those are the people, that hopefully are going to, benefit once all the kinks get out. So when Prop 2 passed, I went to the managing partner at our firm and said, I'm going to start a cannabis practice.
And what did they say? Did they say you're nuts?
They didn't say I was nuts, but their look kind of said it all. And I think they were like, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
They're all good luck with that.
They gave me the blessing. And so, for me, as soon as they gave me the blessing, I knew that the first thing I needed to do was to find who the people are, in the industry, within the patient community, within the cannabis community as a whole, that, had carried the water to that point. And so I just started attending some Utah Can networking events. I just started learning who all the groups were through my Twitter profile, in terms of Truce and Utah Patients Coalition and all these people that I had heard about. I tried to start meeting all of them that I could. And it's just really picked up steam from there. I had a booth at the Utah Can, last May, and hopefully we'll have another one this coming April. But it's really something that I took from literally an idea and have now made into a practice with several clients, both on the THC side and the hemp side.
Did you have kind of a guideline of what you were going to do? Or, did you have someone who has done it before that you could learn from, or has this been just learning along the way constantly?
Yeah, it's really just been kind of learning along the way constantly. We have another lawyer at our firm named Tanner Leonard, and she's known as the liquor lawyer. So if, we have two of the vices covered. We just don't have gambling in Utah, so we don't have the third vice.
We'll get there.
That's right.
No, I'm for you. What'd you say her name was?
Tanner Leonard.
I was going to say, I think I'm familiar with her. I should bring her through.
So she has made almost all of her practice now just out of that. And so that was somewhat of a template, but I really just started doing the things that I thought you would need to do to grow a law practice, networking, going to events, making sure my face was known, came up with some of my own marketing, developed my own website, and just started meeting people and getting involved and paying homage to those that had come before me, and just started handing out business cards and just meeting as many people as I possibly could. Because for me, it's not about just being a lawyer that services the cannabis community. I actually want to be a part of the cannabis community. My feelings about cannabis are strong, and they form the backbone of my practice. I don't think that you could practice in that area if you did not believe in it. That's just my personal belief. I think you have to be
an advocate.
You have to be an advocate and a proponent of it. I just don't think I could be authentically a part of the community if all I wanted to do was just, take someone's retainer payment,
I was curious. I was like, why did this guy decide to do this here in Utah? Not like go to Colorado. Like, to me, it would seem like you could be so much busier.
Like, it would be
Colorado.
better for you personally to go to a state where it's already legal, right?
But for me, I'm born and raised from here, and it's important to me to represent people that are like me, and get involved and to help push forward an industry that I never thought would have been possible in Utah. And, the efforts that the people, that have been doing up on the Hill for a long time, and all the other efforts that all the patient advocates have done, I marvel at it, and where it is, and the fact that we actually have ink on paper and we do have a system, although not perfect. I don't think any cannabis, any state that is legalized cannabis, whether medically or for adult use, has a perfect system. And we have some growing pains that I think we're going to have to go through, but it was important to me to stay true to my roots and help push this industry along here in the state of Utah. So yeah, I had thought about, I've already got connections in Colorado, or maybe I could go to the Northwest or somewhere like that where it's already kind of a built out industry, but I wanted to be part of something new.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of be on the forefront of an industry. And so that's why I jumped in head first with this. And like I said, I think there were lawyers at our firm that were skeptical. And one, I was just, talking with her the other day, and she's like, I just think it's absolutely incredible that you've been able to literally create something out of nothing for yourself. But what I realize is, just like any other business industry, the cannabis industry needs lawyers, needs advocates, needs people that know cannabis law specifically, because to me, it's not something that is, yes, it involves all the areas of law that we work in, but you also have to know the plant, and you have to know, more things about it than just, hey, what does this contract say?
Yeah.
Or something like that. So it was very important to me to stay here in Utah.
Now, we'll probably mention it again. I feel like we should. There's obviously I want to get into like even some of the laws here in Utah, but I don't want to put you on the line because, obviously you're a lawyer, but I don't want people they have to contact their own lawyers. They have to contact their own, they can't take everything you say, obviously here.
Of course. Yeah. None of this is legal advice. That's for sure. Yeah. None of this is legal advice. This is all just my personal.
What do they say? The thoughts in this episode.
Well,
that's right.
And I think we should say that at the beginning, Chrissy, because I'm curious. I want to get into, because a lot of people, well, here, I want to jump into some of these questions. We'll kind of jump around here, and that's the joys of a podcast. So like I said, we have a Facebook group, which I urge everybody to join. If you just go to iamsaltlake.com/group, that will forward you to our Facebook group. But there's a couple of questions. CD Reddish, one of our listeners, mention. He said, if one doesn't have a regular practitioner, where does one go right now to get a prescription? Or is medical marijuana? I mean, can people legally smoke medical marijuana now here in Utah? What's the law?
Well,
man?
in terms of smoking, you cannot.
Well, I guess you can't smoke.
Can't combust it, but you can use a dry flower vaporizer.
Sure.
But yes, patients can use cannabis in Utah, but you have to get a recommendation letter, and people have been struggling to get that. There actually was an article yesterday in the AP about the struggles that patients are having here to find providers that are willing to write them the affirmative defense letter that they can then use to possess cannabis. What most folks, I do believe, are doing is they are getting their letters and they are going to legal dispensaries outside the state of Utah.
Which is technically illegal.
Which is federally illegal. It's not illegal under state law, but it's still federally illegal as it's a Schedule I, substance. And that in and of itself is problematic, but that's what most people are doing. And then they are bringing it back here and they are consuming it. Where a lot of people, I think, are getting in trouble with the law is they don't have it in the right form. Under the Medical Cannabis Act, there's only certain forms that you can have cannabis in. And so, for instance, edibles are a big place that's problematic. In other states, they have gummy bears and gummy worms. And here we only allow like rectangular or cuboid shaped gelatinous cubes or something. That makes it
Jello, right?
Weirdly
like Jello,
specific.
Of course, right? Yeah. And then there's only a few other ways you can use it. Of course, you can't combust it, but you can use a dry flower vape. And so that's where I think the challenges for a lot of people is they'll go to another state, get something that works in that state, bring it back to Utah, and then it doesn't. Or you have, certain law enforcement agencies or, prosecutors or judges that don't know all of the ins and outs of the law, and they think the law doesn't start until next year, or they don't think the letters work. And the letters won't keep you from being arrested. They will keep you from being prosecuted, but they likely won't keep you from being, they don't necessarily keep you from being arrested.
Aren't most cops kind of cool though nowadays, man? I remember parties, and I'm talking like 10 years ago, man. Cops would come and there would be like a big bong on the table and cops just kind of look the other way. I don't know. And I mean, maybe this is bad stuff to bring on a podcast.
Maybe this isn't advice we should be giving people.
Maybe I should edit all this out.
No. But it is. I mean, that's an experience people have.
Well, no, and yeah. I think it depends on,
man.
Yes. And I think that's the difficulty is that the education that is needed around this topic is so immense. And I think until that happens, you're going to have these experiences where people are having the run-ins with the law, or judges are saying, no, this doesn't, the program doesn't start until next year, or prosecutors are unwilling to, to drop cases. And there are, the Utah Patients Coalition and the Libertas Institute have been helping a number of patients with these legal issues. Steve Burton, who's a criminal defense attorney here in Utah, I know has represented a number of these patients that have been, arrested for possession. And so there's a lot of issues swirling around it. I know that different types of information is being passed to different types of law enforcement agencies, and some I think are okay to deal with, some are not. And so there's a million different stories that I've heard of people's experience. And I think it's going to take some time for people to understand, for people to really get that, this is now legal and people can use it. But patients are facing, real obstacles in even getting their affirmative defense letters.
Do you know what's crazy is I remember reading years ago, because I've been following it for a while as well. I mean, I grew up in California and then here. And so I followed, when California became a medical state, and it's just like, wow, this is crazy. But I mean, I remember years ago, some of the people they would throw in jail, and you're just like, wow, this person is sick. And they're throwing these. And that's what's crazy too, is like some of the articles I'll read in the Tribune and stuff. And I'll be like, man, this guy's obviously like not doing well.
There was an article where a mom
got
kicked off of the Parent Teacher Association at her school because she took CBD. Yeah. Like,
and that's legal.
Yeah.
And that's illegal.
Exactly. And I think that's where people don't, and that's why to me, such a big part of this is education. So every chance I get when I talk to people about cannabis, it's very rarely about like, hey, here's my practice. It's much more about, let's talk about this plant. Let's talk about the history of the plant. Let's talk about the 80 plus years, of propaganda that has villainized this plant. Let's talk about, all those things, because I think people need to really see it for what what it is, and not what it's been made out to be. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that mother did get kicked off the PTA. There was that woman that got arrested at Disneyland because she had CBD. I mean, people get jammed up all over the place for it. I just think that as it comes into the light, so to speak, there's still so much stigma that's attached to it, and so many people that still don't truly understand, what the potential for cannabis is. And for a lot of people, they say, oh, well, I didn't, I was an opponent of cannabis until I had a family member that got cancer. And it's what got them through, or I had a family member that was addicted to opioids and they've gotten off of opioids, through cannabis use. Or I've got a member of the family that was in the military and they have extreme PTSD from combat. And now cannabis has helped them to get their life back. That's the stories that I hear more often than not, is people have to have kind of almost a personal experience with cannabis before they're willing to say, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it's not that bad.
It's crazy though. I mean, it's almost 2020 and people still have this like stigma that it's this gateway drug, right?
Yeah.
Like that it's, and I'm not saying it isn't, right?
Well,
like
it
could be. I mean, alcohol could be a gateway drug for some people. I mean, cigarettes could be a gateway drug.
That's true. It's all about the person.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not about the thing. It's about how you handle using the thing.
You were going to say something.
I was going to say, well, the schools here,
the pamphlets.
Two or 3 years ago, our teenage daughter came home with a pamphlet about marijuana, and it was like skulls and crossbones and you're going to die. And just like, she had to write a paper about how bad marijuana was. And I was just like, this is a joke. Well, this is ridiculous.
What's really hard, and I'm sure you run into this, is the consistency throughout 50 states in the United States. And it seems like every state has different thoughts and laws on it. So it's like, who do you even believe? Who do you trust? And then you wonder, well, have we been lied to about everything else too? Right? Like, is everything else just a big lie? Like,
how much is propaganda and how much is reality?
And so it makes it hard, man.
Yeah. And I think, and that's why getting to know the history of prohibition, cannabis prohibition in America has been such an eye opener for me. And what I realized is the cannabis plant embodies so many things that are important to me, both personally and in my practice, in terms of the social justice piece of it, the social equity piece of it, the civil rights piece of it, the right to choose what you put into your own body. And then also too, understanding the possibilities that this plant holds for human beings generally. I mean, I tell people, you have an endocannabinoid system in your body. You do not have an oxycodone or a Vicodin, or a Xanax system in your body. There is a reason that this works well with the human body. And I think they are only just hitting the tip of the iceberg with this. You hear a lot about THC and CBD, but there's 80 plus other cannabinoids, within the plant. There's terpenes that they're starting to learn about, and some things I think you'll see coming in terms of cannabinoids, CBG, which is the precursor to both THC and CBD. You have to harvest the plant early. Otherwise, that cannabinoid disappears. That's becoming a big thing. And just so many other possibilities, not just for cannabis, but I think plant-based medicine in general. I mean, you've seen several cities now, legalize psilocybin.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, with magic mushrooms.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So I think you're seeing the possibilities for plant-based medicine, which I think are huge. And they kind of dovetail with, kind of this plant-based, food that people are approaching, something that's more sustainable. And hemp. I mean, we don't even have to talk about the THC variety. We can talk about hemp for hours and hours. Hempcrete, hemp plastic, all different kinds of textiles, and all these things that are that a hemp plant can provide. And their growing time is incredibly short compared to, trees, of course. I mean, hemp fiber and hemp wood and all these different things that are going to come down the pike. And I think it makes us more sustainable. And those are the things I'm really excited about. I mean, CBD is exciting.
Yeah.
And obviously the fact that we have a medical cannabis program here in Utah is exciting. But to me, industrial hemp and the possibilities for that long term are just fascinating to me.
Well, plus all the land here in Utah that people can grow hemp, and the money that it could bring to the state of Utah. Right. I mean, it could be great for farmers. And
I mean, it seems like the most versatile plant. to be able to create so many different things out of.
There's thousands of uses for the industrial hemp plant. And so for a lot of people, I say to them, if you want to get involved in the cannabis industry here in Utah and you don't want to, take the risk of trying to get one of these very few, medical cannabis licenses there are, get an industrial hemp license. Be a great way to learn. A great way to get involved in the industry. And then when they do open the industry up further on the THC side, you'll be well positioned to get in. But industrial hemp, I tell people, do not underestimate it.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Salt Lake Barber Company. Full disclosure, this is where I go for my beard trims, my haircuts. Isaac over there does a top-notch job. Hey, the Salt Lake Barber Company is located at 10 East 800 South, right on the corner of 8th and Main. They offer haircuts, beard trims, straight razor shaves. They are truly a true community barbershop. They focus on providing the best work environment possible and allowing barbers to always provide the highest quality experience while in the chair. Hey, they do take walk-ins, but if you want a guaranteed appointment, just head on over to saltlakebarberco.com. You get to select your barber. You select your service that you want, like if you want a haircut or a beard trim. And then you get a guaranteed appointment. That way you know, hey, Saturday at 2 o'clock is when I get my haircut. Again, their website, saltlakebarberco.com. And as always, many thanks to the Salt Lake Barber Company for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Is that a pretty tough license to get the industrial hemp license?
No, it's actually much less onerous, much less, expensive than the THC side. The two main components are basically an FBI background check and to pay $500. There's some other things you need with the application process. But those licenses are unlimited. You can cultivate, you can process. And then if you're going to sell your product here in the state, you have to register your products with the Department of Agriculture, which I think is something that is vitally important, in terms of the regulation, is making sure that the products that people are getting have been thoroughly tested and vetted and do not contain anything that's harmful. And I think that's what ultimately should happen with, the vape crisis that's going on is, Congress will hopefully deschedule at some point and it will deschedule cannabis. Yeah. Take it off of, remove it from the schedules
federal
completely.
Schedule 1, which is virtually the same as meth is Schedule 2, which is saying there's more medical value to meth.
So what you're saying is meth is good.
No, strike that. Okay. So back to the industrial hemp license, if somebody was interested in something like that, would they come to you to help draft all that, or is that something?
I can definitely help them with it. I think most people choose to do that
on their own,
necessarily. With the THC licenses, those are more likely to approach, a lawyer, especially the ones where there's a finite number of them, whether they be the cultivation licenses they handed out previously and the pharmacy licenses that they will hand out in December. Those are much more competitive. And so those are more likely where someone would seek out legal counsel. But the hemp licenses, you basically apply, and as long as you meet the minimum criteria, you'll get it. The only place you can't cultivate it is in a home, in whatever, place it would be used as a home. But otherwise, it can pretty well be cultivated anywhere. Now, your bigger challenge on the hemp side, which also is on the THC side, is getting a local business license. I've had some folks call me that have faced those challenges.
They don't want to give them like in the city they're in or something.
Cities, yeah. Interesting. But I do know Salt Lake City itself has been really good. And one of my clients, I just visited his grow yesterday and he's doing well. So it's pretty cool to see.
Back to this CD's question is like, when are we going to start seeing medical cannabis here in Utah? You were mentioning how patients are going out of state right now. When do you think there will actually be some facilities here that people can actually go to it, get it properly, get it through the proper channels? Any idea?
Yeah. So just yesterday, the Department of Health and the Department of Purchasing posted the RFP for the medical cannabis pharmacies, the 14 that are going to be available here in Utah. They're going to be kind of done in two phases. There'll be an initial 8 and then a secondary 6 of them. And the initial 8 can open up on or after March 1 of 2020. And then the next 6, I think it's July 1. So they're going to stagger them just a little bit. So the earliest you will see an actual pharmacy dispensing cannabis in Utah will be March 1 of 2020. I do know that the cultivators, and this could have changed since the last I had heard, but the last I heard, only a single cultivator had gotten fully licensed and is ready to put seeds in the ground. So and a lot of them are having the real estate issues in terms of trying to find real estate that is properly zoned, getting local, business licenses and things like that. So when the legislature took it up in this last special session, the second special session for cannabis, they did put some things in there that kind of, guided, local municipalities, so to speak, on you've got to allow this to happen. Because a lot of the, several had maybe drugged their feet doing it or weren't interested in doing it. And so now, the legislature said, you've got to make this happen. So yeah, March 1 of 2020 is probably the earliest you will see it dispensed, in Utah, but that's assuming that there is enough product to put on shelves. There's enough product to be processed, that can then be put on shelves. So that's the earliest a pharmacy can open here in Utah is March 1.
And we can't bring it from out of state, I guess, right?
No, you can right now. No.
I'm talking about like once these pharmacies open, right? Couldn't they just go to Nevada or something, or Colorado and bring some of their stuff here?
Until January 1 of 2021, the protections that are in place for patients, generally the same ones that are in place now, will still be in place.
Okay.
After that point, it by then, hopefully the system is up and running and people are getting it from here in Utah. But I think that the challenges that they face in even getting seeds in the ground right now makes you wonder about that timeline. I know the legislature is incredibly committed to that timeline because they put that timeline out there. Mm-hmm. And so they don't want to miss it. And they want, that medication to be as available as soon as then. But I think it remains to be seen if that's going to be the case, actually.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by HostGator. Hey, listen, guys, every small business needs a website. I've seen it firsthand right here on this podcast. A lot of the local businesses right here in Salt Lake City think that they can cut corners by just having a presence on Facebook or Instagram. They think that having a website's just going to be way too expensive. What if I told you that you were wrong? Having a website isn't expensive, and actually it's going to be a lot more affordable than you might think. Every business, small or big, you need a website. You need your own piece of real estate right on the internet. So let me tell you why you should choose HostGator. First of all, I've been using them for 7 years now with IamSaltLake.com, and I could not be more happy with their service, with their uptime, and with just everything about them. They offer a 99.9% uptime. They have an excellent user-friendly interface via cPanel, and they also offer 4,500 templates with a free website builder. That alone is great, you guys. Like I said, we've been using them for 7 years and we could not be more happy with them. So we decided to make a special code just for listeners of this podcast. That way you can go out and get yourself a website. If you go to HostGator.com, you select everything that you want, use the promo code podcast when you're checking out, and you're going to save up to 60%. And you'll be directly supporting us at this podcast, again, by using that promo code podcast at checkout. Really easy peasy, guys. Go get yourself a website and you'll thank me later. And as always, many thanks to HostGator for their support of this podcast. Let's jump back into that conversation with J.D. Lauritzen when we got to talk about being a cannabis lawyer right here in Salt Lake City. Here we go. I know we were kind of talking about this a couple minutes ago, and I know, I don't know how much you can really say on this, but like, say, for example, I was looking to get a recommendation for you, but the doctor I'm going to, he's like, no, I don't want to give you one. I mean, what would you suggest that somebody does in that case? Because aren't they supposed to have an established practitioner?
Yes.
So what do you do?
And that's a little bit of a gray area because it does say an established relationship, but it doesn't say, you have to have been. Yes. And so I know there are some companies cropping up that are kind of, referral companies, they're referring patients for a fee to a doctor that will write them, a letter.
Idea, yeah.
Interesting.
And so I think my understanding is at least, probably at least a few visits with a doctor, but that's the problem a lot of people are having is I read stuff, as part of the cannabis groups I'm a part of on Facebook almost every day of, hey, I'm trying to get my letter. I went to my PCP and he or she, it's a non-starter with them. They will not even address it. Who do I go to? And so in those instances, when people are looking for that kind of information, I almost always send them to groups like Truce and groups like Utah Patients Coalition, Utah Epilepsy Association, because to me, those are the groups that really have their thumb on the pulse of what doctors are recommending and not. And the thing that I think is difficult for those doctors that are recommending, eventually, once the program is up and running, there will be a patient cap. They will be capped out. And if you do not have enough doctors recommending, you're then going to run into a patient problem, and an access problem. And that's the real problem. But there's some unique challenges that are posed by Utah's system. And I think has what made a lot of these medical providers reticent to do this. Ours is much more like a prescription would be in terms of there's going to be dosing parameters and things like that. And I know I read a nice blog post about that issue that a doctor had written. And he just said, this is the real problem. They face issues with their DEA licensing if they do it. And ultimately, if the doctor just recommends, well, then they eventually have to go to the pharmacy, and then the on-staff pharmacist at the medical cannabis pharmacy will then have to do the dosing. But they can't do that by law. So it's some of the things they tried in Utah that they thought were going to be unique have proved unworkable. The central fill was one of them that proved unworkable. And I think this whole idea of dosing parameters is going to prove unworkable as well. I know that they want to make this as much like any other kind of medicine that they can, but I'm not sure how much cannabis lends itself to exact dosing and all of these things. I think it's good to have those discussions, and finding the right cultivars or the right strains that work for your particular, ailment. But it's much more, to me, a substance of experience and what works for you. And my advice, always is for people, and I think a lot of people say this, start low and go slow. And find what works for you, find the type of ingestion method that works best for you. But that's the issue that a lot of patients are facing, is even getting that initial letter that would allow them to lawfully possess it. So yes, people are either going out of state or turning to the traditional market or the legacy market. And
if you use a little too much, you just take a nap or eat a little too many Doritos, right?
Take a gallon of milk or whatever.
Now there's another question from CD here, and I'm not really sure what's going on here in Utah. I've been kind of, obviously it's tough to keep up on every state, right? And so his question is, what's going on with drug-related criminal records going away? I know they've talked about this in other states. I know like in California and stuff, they've kind of gotten rid of. Has there been talk about that here in Utah? Getting rid of some of the old drug records, criminal records, stuff with that?
So two things on that. So I think a lot of people do not realize, because it didn't receive as much press as I was hoping it would. It was not part of the overall cannabis legislation, but they did pass the last session the Clean Slate Act, or the Clean Slate Bill, that will allow for supposed to allow for automatic expungement of low-level crimes, including drug crimes. And that's similar to what other states are doing. But my understanding is it might not be so automatic, at least initially. And so what was happening in other states, for instance, in California, they have these kind of just mass automatic expungements where this company, Code for America, had built an algorithm to identify potential people that could have their records expunged, and then they would just expunge all their records. And that's happened in a number of places across the country. Recently, SimGill partnered with, I believe, the Legal Defenders Association. And actually, I had the privilege of seeing Sim get an award the other night at the Utah Minority Bar Association event. And the gentleman that presented Sim talked about their efforts. And Sim identified, I think, 13 or 14,000 different cases that involved about those many individuals, that he is going to reduce the penalties for all of them. And it's very nice to see, a prosecutor that has the views that he does. I know he's not always going to be, popular for the decisions that he makes, but at least in terms of kind of giving people a second chance and reducing the penalties that we've burdened so many people with in our criminal justice system, he's got a good view. So yes, it is happening. I would like to see much more. I had the incredible pleasure of meeting a gentleman by the name of Weldon Angelos the other evening. We started following each other on social media, and I got to know his story. Weldon was given a 55-year minimum mandatory sentence for the sale of cannabis, and he supposedly, but was never, in my understanding, ever totally proven that he had a firearm at the time that the sales were made. So he got a 55-year sentence. He ended up doing 13 and was granted clemency, and he now is making efforts to try to free cannabis offenders. Through raising awareness about social justice and social equity in the industry, and partnering with celebrities and different people that he's had the chance to get to know. But his story, the Weldon Project that he started, and then this Mission Green initiative that's focused just on cannabis offenders, is something that I think you're going to see more and more of. And there's so many incredible groups across the country that are focused on this issue. And someone said to me, or I read this somewhere, that said, if your dispensaries are going to look like Apple stores, you need to start letting all these people out of prison. And you need to start making a space in the industry for them. So social equity is actually something that's of big importance to me. Not only do we need to right the wrongs in terms of wiping away their criminal convictions and those types of things, or getting them out of prison, but we need to make a space within the industry for those that have been, those communities that have been ravaged the most by the war on drugs. So yes, there are things going on here. I would like to see more. And I'm hopeful that eventually we will have those kind of mass automatic expungements.
I talked to a guy a couple years ago that spent a couple years here in the Utah prisons for selling marijuana. And I was talking with him, and I forgot what the exact percentage was. I want to say it was like 95% that were in our prison here in Utah just for marijuana related offenses. I mean, how much would you say, like, at the point of the mountain, or I guess there's another prison, starts with a G. Gunnison. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the one. Would you say most of the people in there are for small, like, drug-related offenses?
Well, when it comes to cannabis specifically, a majority, a vast majority of the arrests are for simple possession, of less, of a couple of grams.
Sure.
Those are the most common arrests. And I think for a lot of people, once you get into the criminal justice system, it's very hard to get back out of it, especially if you're part of certain communities. And that's why, it's so important that we don't just let rich entrepreneurs benefit from the cannabis industry. We have to make sure that there's a place for those people that, when they were doing it to support their families or to support themselves because they didn't have other opportunities, now that it's legal, we need to make sure they have a place within the industry, and that we revive those communities that have been ravaged. And so, certain states I think have taken steps. I'm really interested to see how how their social equity program plays out. Bernie Sanders was it yesterday or 2 days ago, announced his plan to legalize cannabis if he were to become president. I think almost every one of the other Democratic candidates has a plan, or if they are in office right now, has already introduced something. Cory Booker has, Kamala Harris has, Mayor Pete just went to a dispensary and a grow the other day. Beto O'Rourke in the last, debate mentioned it on stage, and Andrew Yang supported him. And to me, it's amazing to see a presidential debate talking about cannabis in a legitimate way that's not, this is the scourge of the earth, we need to, stamp it out.
Or when they were like, what was it, back when like Bill Clinton was president, he had to, I didn't inhale, it's like, you had to like deny, like, well, no, that was actually even a question I was going to ask you earlier is, there was a time when if you just talked about it, you were automatically labeled a pothead. And there was fear. Just to talk about it. And that's what I was wondering if you've run into that, people just thinking, oh my gosh, this JD guy's just a big pothead. You know what I mean? And like, it's almost, it's a serious, let me rephrase this.
There's still a stigma.
There's a stigma, but I think there's a lot more, like, people are willing to talk about it. And it's like, hey, I'll talk about it. I don't smoke it. I don't use it, but I think it's great stuff. I think it helps a lot of people. Have you noticed that too? The stigma changing, like it's not as fearful to talk about?
Yeah. And that's something that I try to do. I try to talk to almost every person I talk about. I try to weave cannabis in at some point, because to me, it's an issue that like I said, it covers so many different things. When I initially started, to dive into this, deeper than just kind of what I had done, to that point, I just started to realize like all these important issues that surround it. So yes, I have started to see that, the people that you can now talk to about it, in a regular form and fashion is pretty incredible. And I think the stigma continues to go away, but there's also still so much surrounding it. And, there are still, I mean, when they had some of the safe banking stuff, was being heard in the House of Representatives, there were still people talking about, gateway theory. And I actually at the special session heard one of the legislators talk about, the gateway theory. And so, yes, there's still a lot of stigma surrounding it. But to me, it has gotten to a point where you're not going to put Pandora back in the box, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, to me, the tide has already risen. And if you are still an opponent of it for all of the reasons that people have opposed it for, since the days of Harry Anslinger, the tide's going to break and crash on top of you. And I just think it's amazing because it's finally getting its just due. And it's not just like, oh, you're a lazy stoner, you're a pothead. Like, now they're realizing like actually high functioning people can use cannabis, and people are turning away from alcohol and turning towards cannabis, and away from opioids and turning towards cannabis. And they're realizing like, oh wow, maybe this is actually medicine for everyone, not just people with a certain enumerated, condition.
What's your prediction on federally? I mean, just for fun. I'm just curious.
No,
I'm curious.
This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, because ultimately that's the linchpin, in my opinion, to cannabis becoming, what it should be, in this country and really across the globe. And there are some countries that are ahead of America on this. Mexico, I think, is getting ready for adult use legalization. Canada already has it. And I know they've faced their struggles, but I think that ultimately they're working in the right direction. Luxembourg, I have the pleasure of knowing a woman that helped them to fully legalize. And she's really awesome. And I think you're going to see a lot of countries across the world do that. But, federally, I think that's the key, is to get it descheduled so it can be properly regulated. It can be properly tested to make sure that it's safe. We can have some sort of uniformity to it, because to me, that's the greatest challenge that it faces. So in terms of a timetable,
I mean, it can't be too much longer, man, because we know too much.
Yeah.
People are like, come on, are you stupid?
The proof is in the pudding. It's helping people.
Well, even people like you said, people running for president now. I mean, there's so much talk about, I mean, do you think the next president maybe?
Well, I think if the next president is a Democrat, I think it probably will. And Bernie proposes to do it via executive action, which I think is
I
interesting.
love Bernie, but I don't know if
I'm not sure if he's going to be the guy that gets in.
Yeah.
But I think they all have some form of it. I think they all are proponents of it in some way. But it's really going to take Congress acting. And the big hurdle that it really has faced has been Mitch McConnell in the Senate. Mitch McConnell is a proponent of industrial hemp, because he's out of Kentucky, and Kentucky is one of the big industrial hemp places, states in America. So he's been very much a proponent of industrial hemp, but he has been very much an opponent of THC. And so any cannabis bills, that have gained any steam always face the trouble of the Senate. So a perfect example is the Safe Banking Act. It passed through the House of Representatives, and it has not yet made it to the floor in the Senate. And there were a number of people that opposed the Safe Banking Act in the House initially, although I think they probably ended up voting for it, saying we need broader reform before we do something about just banking. Because I think they were concerned that, once the banking issues are fixed, they'll forget about the social equity and the social justice piece. But for a number of people, they said, no, this is the first step we're going to take, and then that's going to follow. So my understanding is that the House of Representatives is going to take up the MORE Act that I think was introduced by Representative Nadler, which does deal with outright legalization. So if I had to say, I'd say 3 to 5 years if you want to put a prediction on it, but I wouldn't put it past the current president to attempt to do that. try to win the election next year.
Oh,
there's been a number of rumors about that, but
being that he's so obsessed with money, you'd think he would be all about it. But wouldn't so even if they did it on a federal level, each state would still be able to control what happens within that state, wouldn't they?
Yes.
So even if
state overrides federal,
if federally they're like, okay, this is not a Schedule 1 anymore, let's legalize it, 21 and over or whatever, couldn't the state of Utah could still say, no, we don't want it to be fully legal here.
Well, and I think industrial hemp has given a good example of that. So recently in the state of Indiana's industrial hemp laws do not allow for smokable hemp flower. They make it a crime to possess it. Well, a federal judge just recently ruled that was unconstitutional, and really that it went against the 2018 Farm Bill. So yes, there are things that we would still be able to control in terms of our own laws, but you would also have to comply with federal law as well. So you couldn't be more restrictive necessarily, than the federal law. It would still have to comport with, the Constitution, the Commerce Clause, all the different things that are in play under federal law. So yes, states would still have their own programs, but you also wouldn't be allowed to say, well, Congress has said that adult use is legal. We're not going to allow adult use. You certainly couldn't do that. But yes, there would still be individual state programs. But I also think there would be some more uniform standards that you would follow on a federal level too.
What would you tell somebody? Let's say somebody's listening to the podcast right now and they're getting ready to go to law school, right? And they want to kind of do something like you're doing. Focus on cannabis law, focus on hemp law. I mean, is there anything you would recommend to them or tell them?
I'm not aware of any law school programs yet that are offering courses, but I do know there are a number of major universities, and I'm not sure which university I just read about, but they said that they were going to make the class available for like 20 to 30 students, and I think 5 or 6 times that many wanted to. And so it's becoming, there are universities that are now going to, I think, offer undergrad. There might even be some that might offer graduate programs. You can go to places like, there are several different kind of training programs that have sprouted up, and some that have existed for years, like Oaksterdam University out in Oakland, where you can go learn and different things. And so I think you are going to see a number of people graduate with degrees in cannabis specifically. So in terms of law school, I'm not aware of anybody that are teaching classes specifically about it, but I think just getting to know, first of all, knowing the history. I think, helping to educate yourself on the history, and then helping to educate yourself on what your states, or the state you hope to practice in, what their laws are, and just getting to know and then understanding what it is federally, because that, like I said, that's the real hurdle to everything is the federal prohibition of it. But yeah, for people going to law school, I think find the groups that are in your state, whether they be patient groups, whether they be industry folks, and get tied into those. I've had a chance to meet a couple of law students that are interested in cannabis, and they asked me, well, how do you do it? And I said, you just do it. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not something that there's
no playbook.
There's no group, that's going to help you along. For me, when I started showing up to those events, I was the only lawyer, and still in most instances, I am the only lawyer that's there. And I know there are others that are doing it, but a lot of regional and national law firms have been a little more reticent because of its federal status.
Right.
If they're doing, if they're practicing law in multiple states, they're involved in interstate commerce, and it's still legal under federal law. So me being, our law firm being based here in Utah, I felt comfortable, being able to do it because it's legal under state law.
So I have a question. Mm-hmm. When you close a deal with a client, how do you celebrate? I'm kidding.
I can tell you though.
Take them out for a beer. I guess,
yeah.
Right?
Well, I can tell you that, when, it was funny. I was sitting in my office a couple of weeks ago, and a package got delivered to me, and I wasn't expecting anything. And I got a couple of bottles of CBD oil from a nice, company that I've had the pleasure to meet. And I told somebody, I said, you're a real cannabis lawyer when you're getting cannabis delivered to your office. So, and I'm actually, a huge proponent of CBD. It's been great for, great for me. And I'm grateful that, Utah has one of the foremost one of the most progressive CBD, hemp laws in America. And we've had it since 2014, with Charlie's Law. And I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the people that, moved the needle on that initially. And so, that's when I knew I was I'm a real cannabis lawyer, and I'm getting cannabis in my office. That's for sure.
Very cool. There's a few Utah, Salt Lake City related questions we like to ask on here. And I got to ask him, I want to kind of shift gears this way. I don't want to hold you up here all day. I don't want to take too much of your time. But what's like the JD tour, man? Like, we all have family and friends that come to Salt Lake, come to Utah. Is there like an area of town, a building? Like, what do you like to show off, man?
So I was actually talking to my girlfriend about this, and she and I love to go on drives. Yeah. We love to just get in the car and drive somewhere, try to find a place to have lunch in the middle, and then kind of finish the drive. And a couple of the favorite ones that we take is we like to take the drive that goes up around the backside of Mount Timpanogos and comes down into Orem. So you take I-80 and you get off like you're going towards Heber, and then you continue on around the reservoir and around the backside of Mount Timpanogos, and then we usually come out in Orem. Another one that we really like to do is we like to go up Ogden Canyon and then go like you're going into Huntsville, but then go across the mountain and come down into kind of where Mountain Green is. And then one that we just did a couple of weekends ago, I had never been to Mirror Lake. So we drove up to Mirror Lake and then drove through Evanston, Wyoming, and saw the leaves, and it was beautiful. So those are some things we like to do. And of course, I mean, I wouldn't be a good University of Utah football fan if I didn't say that I would take them to a University of Utah football game, which incidentally, I'm going to one tonight. So
very cool. Very cool. What would you, this might be a big question for a lawyer, especially, is what would you change about Salt Lake or Utah if you could? I mean, I guess that's not cannabis related.
Yeah. I mean, it might be cannabis related, right?
I mean, honestly, I mean, if we could have adult use, legalization in the state of Utah, it would be incredible. Cause I think that yes, patients are the most in need of, people with certain conditions are in the most need of cannabis. I think everyone could benefit from it. Absolutely. And I honestly think too that, you look at a state like Colorado, and Colorado just recently passed the $1 billion threshold for tax revenue, right? And my understanding is they no longer request federal funding. And I know in their schools, children are given iPads and laptops and different things, and their infrastructure can benefit from it. I just think that there should be a way that not only can you make it affordable for people to use, but you can also make a lot of revenue off of it that can then benefit, can be then put back into the communities, and you can help to heal some of the divisiveness of the war on drugs. So that's what I would say is adult use legalization would be something that I would like to see come to Utah. And
speaking of Colorado, just for a little bit of a side jot, I mean, it seems like crime hasn't gone up. It seems like crime has, if anything, it seems like,
well, it eliminates the black market, right?
Yeah, and the black market,
but minimalizes.
And the black market, I think, where it, or as I call it, the traditional market or the legacy market, because I think the black market just is not a name I'm, comfortable with anymore. But it definitely does help to, I think, push that out a little bit. And so, when you talk about crime, it has not gone up. They've done studies, that show that in some places crime has actually decreased. Teen usage has actually gone down in places where there's legalization. I keep running across the stories that tell parents are supposed to warn their children about, you might get a THC gummy in your trick or treat bag. And I'm just like, this is the fear mongering.
Nobody loves your kids that much, right?
I was going to say, no one's giving away their gummies. You know what I mean? But that's still the problem, is there's still that type of stuff that's necessarily out there. But yes, the studies are starting to show that a lot of the things that have been, espoused about cannabis for years and years just simply aren't true. And to me, when you no longer have that same incentive because it's been necessarily legalized, you don't have the same criminal element that follows it. You just don't.
Right.
What about favorite local eating spots here in Salt Lake City? We ask everybody who comes through here. I'm sure you got one or two favorite places.
Well, I mean, as you can tell, I definitely am an eater, and my one of my favorite all time restaurants here is a Mexican restaurant called El Chihuahua.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's just around the corner from my house. Back in the days when I was an imbiber, I definitely enjoyed their Death Star margaritas. But the food to me is really excellent. I really like that place, and then I'm also a big steak guy. And, you could say all of the normal places, you could say Ruth's Chris, you could say, any of the, Fleming's and all these different steakhouses. But one of my favorite steakhouses here in Utah is actually up in Park City, and it's called Grub Steak. And they have this huge cut of prime rib, that I get when I go up there. And the last time, or maybe 2 times ago when I was there, I finished the whole cut of prime rib, and their maitre d' came up to me and said, he was like, this is going to sound weird. He's like, but I've been watching you eat that. And he said, not only is that the fastest that I've seen someone eat that prime rib, he said, but that's the most calm, that's the most calm demeanor I've ever seen. So I've just got to, basically congratulate you. So I love that place. It's great.
I'll have to go there. We have to go. I'm a sucker for a good steak.
Steak.
For sure. And and they've got other good stuff there too. But I've told people that actually the best steak that I've ever had, I recently just had in San Antonio, Texas, and they put chili salt on it. It was a Wagyu ribeye, with chili salt on it. And it basically tasted like a chili cheese Frito, but as a steak. And it was incredible. And I just can't, the name of the place I think was the Esquire. It has the longest wooden bar in Texas. And it was
the
really,
longest
really
wooden,
good.
There's something to be known for.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, but no, I'm a big beef guy, but when it comes to my favorite steakhouse, it's up there for sure.
Now, isn't your law office where you're practicing law? You're right downtown, right?
Yep. 257 East and 200 South.
And say the name of the firm again.
Christensen and Jensen.
Christensen and Jensen.
Yep.
So if people listening, they could track you down there, hit
absolutely.
you up. I mean, do you have a phone number there? Like if people
801-323-5000. You can also find my website, utcannabislaw.com, or my Twitter handle, utcannabislaw. And those are usually good ways to
Are you on Facebook at all or no?
I am personally on Facebook,
but
not professionally. Twitter is the I guess platform that I've chosen so far for my practice. I've thought about doing a little bit of Instagram because I start to take some pictures and some stuff. But Twitter's been incredible. Has really been a good resource for me to get plugged into the community.
Yeah. So if any listeners can benefit from you, I mean, definitely hit you up.
Of course. I'm happy to help.
Maybe help out some of our listeners in cannabis or hemp related needs. It's been great to chat with you today, JD. Is there anything that you were hoping we would talk about that we didn't talk about? I'd like to open it up a little bit here, just so before we completely run out of the recording time, and if there's anything you wanted to promote or talk about or make sure to mention.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, as exciting as this is and the opportunities that it's going to create for so many and that it's already created. I just can't stress enough that we can't forget about those that the war on drugs has taken its toll on. Because I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't advocating for those people that have experienced the negative side of the Department of Justice and the negative side of prosecutors and drug laws and all of these mandatory minimum sentences, and I tell the story of Weldon Angelos, but there's so many others that are like him. And so that's what I, above all else, would say is we need to take care of those folks, and we need to remember that this is about medical cannabis patients and it needs to benefit them. And whatever I can do to help those people, and also whatever I can help to do to help those people that want to become a part of this industry and that want to find a way to, they're almost like gold miners, it's a really similar type of situation. But I want it to be done the right way too, because to me, it's not just, hey, let's get in and make $1 million and however we can. It needs to be done the right way, because this plant has faced so many struggles over the years that I don't want to give the pundits and the opponents of it more reasons to vilify it than they already have for the last, 80 or 90 years. Do
you have anything you want to bring up, Chrissy, before we well, I mean, obviously your final question. Chrissy has a final question, but I didn't know if there was any other questions.
I feel like we could talk for hours, but
easily for hours.
And that's the problem. I always tell people, we'll just have to bring you back through, or if you have any recommendations.
It'd be really fun, especially as everything progresses, to bring you back in and learn more about what's been changing in the industry and, like how Utah is moving forward.
For sure.
But, you want to throw your,
I'm
Chrissy
good,
has a final question.
I do have a final question for you. Can you leave our listeners with a motto or piece of life advice that you live by?
There's a quote by Teddy Roosevelt, and it's called "The Man in the Arena." And this is something that since the day that I read it or heard it, it really struck me. And I think it's about being a part of life and not just watching life. So I'll leave you with this. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And it's just something that I have strived to live by, because you have to go out and do. Those that watch from the sidelines and critique others, to me, aren't the people that push the needle. Mm-hmm. And as a lawyer, especially in some of the areas I practice, civil rights and cannabis and these areas that need advocacy for being a voice for the voiceless is really, really important to me. And that's why I'm so grateful to be a part of the cannabis community and to have gotten to know these amazing, amazing people that are really pushing this industry forward. And they're the reason that we have it. And I couldn't be more grateful to them. But to me, it's about showing up and being a part of your own life as opposed to just watching your life go by.
Many thanks again to J.D. Lauritzen for joining us on this episode. All of the links that we mentioned in this conversation can be found with this episode's show notes on our website, which can be found at iamsaltlake.com/406. And that's for episode 406.
Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9, amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org.
And it is the first episode of the month, the first episode of November 2019, which means a brand new decade starts here in about a month, guys. Hopefully you're ready. But since this is the first episode of the month, this is when we give some love to our Patreon supporters. This is like our frontline people. These are the people that are like helping keep the show going right alongside of our sponsors. So we just want to read this list really quick. And if you would like to become a Patreon supporter, just go to patreon.com/IamSaltLake. We also have the link right on our website. But let's read down this list, Chrissy. We got some great supporters. We really do. We got John Miller. We got Mark Copeland, Todd Bjorkland, Tim Horan, Nicole Davison, Alex Santee, Brandon Hill, Mountain Standard Time Marketing, Will Dugdale, Brittany Hemingway, Jeff Hadfield, Eric Tamaro, Sana, Alan Martindale, Nick Naylor, Brett A. Schmidt, 3 Irons SLC, Nikki Line, Michelle Stevens-Williams, Dirt in Your Skirt, Christopher A. Heiser, and Jay Chambers. What a list of awesome people there, Chrissy.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for supporting us always.
And as always, we'd love it if you became a Patreon supporter. It's a great way to support the show. You can go to iamsaltlake.com/Patreon. That will forward you right to patreon.com/IamSaltLake.
That's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to show your support for this podcast by supporting our show sponsors, KRCL, Green Bike, Salt Lake Barber Company, and HostGator. We'll have links for all of them at our website under the notes for this episode, which you can always find at iamsaltlake.com.
And remember, you can always share your favorite episodes on social media, share them with your family and friends right there, or just tell a coworker at work tomorrow. Hey, you have a great week. Make sure to get out and enjoy the city, support local whenever possible, and we'll see you on the next episode.
And good night, Grammy.